Elena set down her rifle and looked up at Sergeant Major Brooks, whose expression had transformed completely from the skeptical dismissiveness he'd shown earlier. The man who'd attributed her previous performances to luck was now staring at her with something approaching awe. "Sergeant Major," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent range, "I believe we need to discuss my training background." 3 months earlier, Elena Vasquez had walked through the gates of Fort Davidson carrying a single duffel bag and a rifle case that contained more history than anyone at the base could have imagined. Her transfer paperwork listed her as a staff sergeant with standard infantry training and basic marksmanship qualifications, a deliberately understated description that she'd requested through unofficial channels. After Miguel's death, Elena had wanted nothing more than to fade into the background of military life, to find a posting where she could serve quietly without the weight of expectations or the burden of reputation. The advanced marksmanship program at Fort Davidson had seemed like the perfect assignment. It was technically challenging enough to keep her skills sharp, but isolated enough to avoid the kind of attention that had followed her throughout her Marine career. Elena had specifically requested assignment to a unit where her previous accomplishments weren't widely known, where she could simply be another soldier working to improve her shooting skills. What she hadn't anticipated was the particular brand of skepticism that would greet a woman in a predominantly male program. During her first week at Fort Davidson, Elena had quickly realized that her gender would define how others perceived her performance, regardless of her actual abilities. Every successful shot was attributed to luck. Every good grouping dismissed as the result of favorable conditions. Every demonstration of technical knowledge treated as rote memorization rather than hard-earned expertise. Sergeant Major Brooks had set the tone during Elena's initial evaluation, when she'd scored in the top 10% of all program participants. Instead of acknowledging her performance, he'd made a note in her file about beginner's luck and suggested that her scores would likely decline as the training became more challenging. The comment had stung, not because Elena doubted her abilities, but because it revealed how little her new commanding officer thought of her potential. The pattern had continued throughout her first month at the base. During equipment familiarization sessions, Elena had demonstrated knowledge of ballistics and rifle systems that exceeded what was expected of soldiers at her listed experience level. Instead of curiosity about where she'd acquired such knowledge, her instructors had simply moved on to the next topic, apparently assuming that she'd memorized information without truly understanding it. Corporal Davidson had been particularly dismissive during a class on environmental factors affecting long-range shooting. When Elena had correctly calculated wind drift for a complex scenario involving variable wind speeds and multiple range segments, Davidson had loudly announced that she must have gotten lucky with the math. The instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams, had nodded in agreement rather than examining Elena's calculations, which were not only correct, but demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of advanced ballistic principles. Elena had endured these dismissals with the patience learned during 15 years of military service. She'd encountered prejudice before, though rarely in such a concentrated form. During her Marine career, her abilities had been so obviously exceptional that even skeptical colleagues had been forced to acknowledge her competence. At Fort Davidson, her deliberate decision to downplay her background had created an information vacuum that others filled with their own biases and assumptions. The social dynamics of the advanced marksmanship program had proven particularly challenging. Elena lived in the same barracks as several other program participants, sharing common areas and dining facilities with men who seemed determined to view her as an interloper rather than a colleague. Meals had become exercises in diplomatic silence, with Elena eating quickly and returning to her quarters to avoid conversations that invariably turned to speculation about whether she belonged in the program. Specialist Martinez had been especially vocal about his belief that Elena's presence represented a lowering of standards. During one memorable dining hall conversation, he'd argued loudly that the military was going soft by allowing women into elite programs, and that Elena's continued participation, despite her obvious lack of qualifications, proved that political correctness was more important than combat effectiveness. Elena had listened to the entire diatribe while finishing her breakfast, then quietly cleared her tray and left without responding. The most frustrating aspect of her situation had been the complete lack of curiosity about her background. Elena's personnel file contained enough hints to prompt questions from anyone who bothered to look carefully. Her service record showed multiple deployment ribbons, specialized training completions, and commendations that were inconsistent with basic infantry experience. A thorough review would have revealed gaps in her timeline that could only be explained by classified assignments or advanced training programs. Yet no one had bothered to investigate. Sergeant Major Brooks had conducted her initial interview based on a superficial reading of her paperwork, asking routine questions about her previous assignments without delving into the specifics of her experience. When Elena had mentioned her deployment history, Brooks had simply nodded and moved on to administrative details, apparently satisfied with surface-level information. Elena's living situation had reinforced her isolation from the other program participants. While most of the men socialized together during off-duty hours, sharing drinks at the base club or organizing weekend activities, Elena had rarely been invited to join these gatherings. The few times she'd attempted to participate in group conversations, her contributions had been politely ignored or dismissively acknowledged, making it clear that her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. The technical aspects of the training program had provided Elena with her only real satisfaction during those first 3 months. Despite the social challenges, she genuinely enjoyed the opportunity to practice precision shooting in a structured environment. The facilities at Fort Davidson were excellent, with well-maintained ranges, quality equipment, and challenging target scenarios that tested different aspects of marksmanship skills. Elena had been careful to moderate her performance during routine training exercises, scoring well enough to avoid remedial instruction but not so consistently that she drew unwanted attention. This delicate balance had required considerable self-discipline, as her natural competitive instincts urged her to shoot to the best of her abilities. Instead, she deliberately missed shots that she could have easily made, varied her grouping sizes to suggest inconsistency, and avoided displaying the kind of systematic precision that would have indicated professional-level training. The deception had been psychologically exhausting. Elena had spent years as a Marine taking pride in her shooting abilities, building a reputation as one of the most capable snipers in her unit. At Fort Davidson, she'd been forced to hide those same abilities, pretending to struggle with concepts that were second nature to her, and accepting criticism for performances that were actually masterfully controlled displays of apparent mediocrity. Her quarters had become a refuge where Elena could drop the pretense of being an ordinary soldier. The small room contained few personal items, but those she'd brought held significant meaning. A photograph of Miguel in his dress uniform sat on her nightstand, a reminder of why she'd needed this fresh start. Her Marine Corps sniper badge was tucked away in a locked box, along with commendations and certificates that told the story of a career she was no longer ready to claim publicly. During quiet evenings, Elena had often found herself cleaning her rifle while reflecting on the strange situation she'd created for herself. The M24 was virtually identical to weapons she'd used during multiple deployments, familiar in every detail from the bolt handle's texture to the scope's adjustment increments. Her muscle memory could disassemble and reassemble the rifle in complete darkness, a skill developed during night operations where equipment maintenance had to be performed without creating visible light signatures. The irony of her situation hadn't been lost on Elena. She possessed skills that would have been invaluable to the advanced marksmanship program, knowledge and experience that could have benefited other soldiers who were genuinely struggling with the technical challenges of precision shooting. Instead, she'd been relegated to the role of mediocre participant, occasionally offering tentative suggestions that were dismissed by instructors who assumed she was guessing, rather than drawing upon extensive practical experience. Elena's interactions with Lieutenant Colonel Chen had been among the few bright spots during her first months at Fort Davidson. Chen was a serious professional who evaluated soldiers based on their performance rather than their demographics, and she'd noticed inconsistencies in Elena's shooting that suggested greater capability than her official record indicated. During one private conversation, Chen had asked direct questions about Elena's training background, sensing that there was more to the story than appeared in her personnel file. Elena had deflected those questions as diplomatically as possible, providing technically accurate but incomplete answers that satisfied Chen's immediate curiosity without revealing the full extent of her experience. She'd described her previous assignments in general terms, mentioning deployment locations and unit types without going into specifics about her role or responsibilities. Chen had seemed to accept these explanations, though Elena suspected that the lieutenant colonel's sharp intelligence had detected the evasions. The social isolation had become more pronounced as Elena's first months at the base continued. While other program participants formed friendships and mutual support networks, Elena remained an outsider who was tolerated but not embraced. She'd observed the easy camaraderie that developed between soldiers who trusted each other's competence, the kind of professional respect that made demanding training bearable and even enjoyable. Elena missed that sense of belonging more than she'd expected. During her Marine career, she'd been part of teams where her abilities were not only recognized but relied upon by others whose lives depended on her skills. The transition to being viewed as potentially incompetent had been jarring, a reminder of how much her professional identity had been tied to the respect of her peers. The physical challenges of maintaining her deception had also taken their toll. Elena was naturally competitive, with the kind of perfectionist mindset that had driven her to excel in every aspect of her military career. Deliberately performing below her capabilities went against every instinct she'd developed as a professional soldier, creating a constant internal tension between what she could do and what she allowed herself to demonstrate. Her sleep had suffered as a result of this psychological stress. Elena often found herself lying awake at night, replaying training exercises where she'd missed shots intentionally or accepted criticism for mistakes she hadn't actually made. The accumulated frustration of 3 months spent hiding her true abilities had created a reservoir of pent-up energy that demanded release. The morning of the quarterly assessment had begun like any other, with Elena following her usual routine of early physical training, breakfast in the dining hall, and equipment preparation at the range. She'd intended to deliver another carefully modulated performance, scoring well enough to avoid negative attention while maintaining her cover as an ordinary soldier with limited experience. What she hadn't anticipated was how the casual dismissiveness of her fellow soldiers would affect her mental state that particular morning. The comments about luck and inevitable failure had triggered something deeper than mere annoyance. Elena had realized that she was tired of pretending to be less capable than she actually was, exhausted by the constant effort required to hide abilities that represented the culmination of years of dedicated training and dangerous deployments. The decision to reveal her true capabilities had crystallized during those final moments before her first shot. Elena had looked down the range at the targets arrayed before her and made a choice that would fundamentally alter her situation at Fort Davidson. Instead of another performance designed to avoid attention, she would demonstrate exactly why she'd been one of the most respected snipers in the Marine Corps. The emergency alarm pierced through the afternoon quiet of Fort Davidson at exactly 1,347 hours, its urgent wail cutting across the base like a razor through silk. Elena was in the armory cleaning her rifle when the sound reached her, followed immediately by the metallic voice of the base communication system crackling to life with words that made her blood freeze. Code red, active shooter situation at Davidson Elementary School. All available personnel report to Staging Area Alpha immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Elena's hands stilled on her rifle cleaning rod as the announcement continued with details that painted an increasingly grim picture. An armed individual had barricaded himself inside the elementary school located just 2 miles from the base, a facility that served military families and housed over 300 children ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade. The shooter had already fired multiple rounds inside the building, and early reports suggested there were casualties among both students and staff. The elementary school was more than just another civilian facility to Elena. During her 3 months at Fort Davidson, she'd volunteered there twice a week as part of a base community outreach program, helping struggling students with reading and mathematics. She knew the layout of every classroom, every hallway, every potential hiding place and escape route. More importantly, she knew the faces of dozens of children who were now trapped inside with an armed killer. Elena's mind immediately began processing tactical information as she secured her cleaning supplies and prepared to respond to the emergency call. Davidson Elementary was a single-story brick building constructed in the 1960s, with large windows that provided excellent visibility into most classrooms. The main entrance was flanked by administrative offices, while the cafeteria and gymnasium were located at the opposite end of the building. Between these anchor points lay 12 classrooms, 2 computer labs, a library, and various storage areas that could serve as either hiding places or death traps depending on the shooter's movements. The base's emergency response protocol called for all personnel to report to designated staging areas where they would receive specific assignments based on their training and capabilities. Elena knew she would likely be assigned to perimeter security or crowd control, standard roles for soldiers without specialized law enforcement or tactical training. Under normal circumstances, this would have been appropriate. Today, with children's lives hanging in the balance, Elena couldn't accept such limitations. She grabbed her rifle and tactical gear, moving with the efficient urgency that had characterized her response to combat situations during multiple deployments. As she ran toward the staging area, Elena's mind was already calculating angles, distances, and possibilities. If the shooter had positioned himself strategically within the school, he could potentially observe and engage any law enforcement officers who attempted to breach the building through conventional entry points. The staging area was organized chaos, with soldiers, military police, and civilian law enforcement officials coordinating their response to an unprecedented crisis. Elena recognized several members of her advanced marksmanship program among the assembled personnel, including Sergeant Major Brooks, who was consulting with the incident commander about optimal personnel deployment. "Vasquez!" Brooks spotted her and waved her toward a group of soldiers being organized for perimeter security. "You're with Team Charlie. Lieutenant Morrison will brief you on your sector assignment." Elena approached the group but kept her attention focused on the briefing being conducted by the incident commander, a civilian police captain named Rodriguez, who was outlining what they knew about the situation inside the school. The information was fragmentary but disturbing. The shooter appeared to be a former military contractor with combat experience and advanced tactical training. He'd entered the school through a side entrance during lunch period, when the cafeteria was filled with children and the hallways were crowded with students moving between classes. "Current position unknown," Captain Rodriguez was saying to the assembled tactical team leaders. "He's fired approximately 15 rounds, and we have confirmed casualties in the main hallway near the administrative offices. The building's lockdown procedures have been activated, which means most classrooms are secured, but we don't know how many students or staff members might be trapped in common areas." Elena studied the architectural diagrams of the school that had been taped to the side of a command vehicle. The building's design presented significant tactical challenges for any assault team. Multiple corridors created numerous angles where the shooter could position himself to engage responding officers, while the large windows that normally made the classrooms bright and welcoming now provided potential firing positions that could dominate the surrounding area. "Sniper support is en route from the state police," Rodriguez continued, "but their estimated arrival time is 45 minutes. We can't wait that long with children's lives at stake." Elena felt her pulse quicken as she processed this information. 45 minutes was an eternity in a tactical situation. The shooter could kill dozens of people in that time frame, especially if he was systematically moving through the building rather than remaining in a fixed position. More critically, the responding officers would be operating without Overwatch support, making any building entry attempt exponentially more dangerous. "What about local marksmen?" asked Major Patterson, the senior military officer on scene. "Surely we have qualified personnel who could provide interim sniper support until the state police assets arrive." Elena watched as Brooks consulted a personnel list, his expression growing increasingly frustrated. "Our best qualified marksman is Sergeant Collins, but he's currently on leave in Colorado. The next most experienced shooter is—" He paused, checking the list again. "Staff Sergeant Williams from the training cadre, but his maximum effective range is limited to about 400 meters with standard equipment." The tactical problem was becoming clear to Elena. The school's position relative to surrounding buildings and terrain features meant that any effective sniper position would require shots at distances exceeding 600 meters, well beyond the capabilities of most military personnel who weren't specifically trained for precision long-range shooting. Without proper overwatch, any tactical team attempting to breach the building would be operating blind, unable to determine the shooter's position until they were already inside and potentially engaged in close-quarters combat. Elena looked toward the school building, visible in the distance beyond the command vehicles and staging areas. Even from this distance, she could see the potential sniper positions that would provide optimal coverage of the building's entrances and interior corridors. The water tower to the northeast would offer an elevated position with clear sightlines into most classrooms. The maintenance building to the south provided concealment with multiple firing positions that could cover different approach routes. "Ma'am," Elena approached Captain Rodriguez, her voice carrying the calm authority that had served her during countless tactical briefings in combat zones. "I'd like to volunteer for sniper support duties." Rodriguez looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "What's your qualification level, soldier?" Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second, knowing that her next words would irrevocably end her carefully maintained anonymity. "I'm a Marine-trained scout sniper with multiple combat deployments. I can provide overwatch support while we wait for state police assets to arrive." The conversation around the command post stopped abruptly as Brooks and several other officers turned to stare at Elena. The information she'd just revealed was completely inconsistent with her personnel file, which listed her as an ordinary infantry soldier with basic marksmanship training. "Vasquez," Brooks said slowly, "your record shows no advanced sniper training. Are you telling me there's been an error in your documentation?" Elena met his gaze directly, her decision made. "Sir, my transfer paperwork was deliberately abbreviated for personal reasons. First completed Marine Corps Scout Sniper School and served as a designated marksman during 3 combat deployments. I can provide effective long-range fire support at distances up to 1,200 meters with appropriate equipment." Major Patterson stepped forward, his expression intense. "Can you verify these claims?" "My service record includes 2 Bronze Stars and a Navy Cross for actions involving precision shooting in combat situations," Elena replied. "I can provide references from my former commanding officers, but sir, we don't have time for a detailed background check. There are children in that building who need immediate protection." Captain Rodriguez was studying Elena with the kind of analytical gaze that law enforcement officers reserved for critical assessments. "Assuming your claims are accurate, what would you need to provide effective sniper support?" Elena had already mentally cataloged the available equipment and positioned herself for this conversation. "I'll need my personal rifle, which is zeroed for my shooting characteristics, and access to a position that provides clear observation of the school building. The water tower would be optimal, but the maintenance building could work if the tower is inaccessible." "Personal rifle?" Rodriguez asked. "An M24 sniper weapon system that I've maintained and modified for precision shooting. It's currently in the armory, properly secured and documented." Brooks was shaking his head in apparent disbelief. "Vasquez, if you're qualified as you claim, why haven't you mentioned this during your 3 months in the advanced marksmanship program?" Elena could hear the distant sound of sirens as additional emergency vehicles arrived at the staging area, each new arrival emphasizing the urgency of their situation. "Sir, I requested a low-profile assignment for personal reasons after my husband's death. I didn't intend to hide my qualifications, but I wasn't ready to discuss my combat experience." The admission hung in the air for a moment, providing context that explained Elena's behavior without excusing the potential consequences of her deception. Rodriguez was the first to break the silence, his law enforcement instincts overriding military protocol concerns. "Major Patterson, I need to make a command decision here. We have casualties inside that building and no other qualified sniper support available. If Staff Sergeant Vasquez can provide what she claims, we need to utilize her capabilities immediately." Elena felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as the tactical situation crystallized around her. This was the moment she'd been unconsciously preparing for during 3 months of forced mediocrity, the crisis that would demand everything she'd learned during years of specialized training and combat experience. "Sir," she addressed Rodriguez directly, "give me 15 minutes to get into position, and I'll provide you with complete observation of the school building and immediate fire support if the tactical situation requires it." Patterson was consulting with Brooks, their conversation too quiet for Elena to overhear but animated enough to suggest significant disagreement. She waited patiently, understanding that her sudden revelation had created complications beyond the immediate tactical situation. When they finished their discussion, Patterson approached her with an expression that mixed suspicion with desperate hope. "Vasquez, I'm authorizing you to take a sniper position, but you'll be operating under direct observation by one of our tactical team leaders. Any unauthorized shots or actions that endanger civilian lives will result in immediate court-martial charges." Elena nodded her acceptance of these terms, though she privately wondered if any of the available observers would be able to accurately assess her actions from a tactical perspective. "Understood, sir. I'll need to retrieve my rifle and check my equipment before moving to position." As she turned to leave, Captain Rodriguez called after her, "Staff Sergeant, I hope you understand what you're taking on here. If you can't deliver what you've promised, children are going to die while we wait for other options." Elena looked back at the school building, where she knew dozens of terrified children were hiding in classrooms and hoping that someone would come to save them. She thought about the young faces she'd worked with during her volunteer sessions, bright kids with endless potential who deserved the chance to grow up and live full lives. "Sir," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had sustained her throughout the most dangerous moments of her military career, "I don't miss." Elena retrieved her rifle from the armory with movements that revealed 15 years of muscle memory built through countless similar situations. The M24 felt different in her hands now, no longer a prop and an elaborate deception, but the precision instrument it had always been designed to be. She conducted her pre-deployment equipment check with the systematic efficiency that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours, each action performed with the kind of unconscious competence that separated professional operators from weekend warriors. Sergeant Major Brooks watched her equipment preparation with growing amazement, as details he'd previously overlooked suddenly took on new significance. The rifle case Elena opened wasn't standard military issue, but a custom transportation system designed to protect precision equipment during frequent movement. Her scope wasn't the basic optic that came with standard sniper rifles, but an advanced variable power system worth more than most soldiers made in a month. The ammunition she selected from her personal supply wasn't standard military ball rounds, but match-grade cartridges that had been individually weighed and measured for consistency. "Jesus Christ, Vasquez," Brooks muttered as Elena assembled her equipment with practiced efficiency. "You've been sitting in my training program for 3 months with gear that's better than anything we have in our official inventory." Elena made final adjustments to her scope settings, movements precise and economical. "Sir, I've learned that quality equipment properly maintained is the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. This rifle and I have been through a lot together." The understatement was massive. Elena's M24 had accompanied her through the mountains of Afghanistan, where she'd provided overwatch for special operations teams conducting high-risk raids against Taliban leadership. It had been with her during urban operations in Iraq, where precision shots through narrow windows had saved the lives of pinned-down infantry units. The rifle bore scars from IED explosions, scratches from helicopter insertions, and wear marks from countless hours of field use that told the story of a weapon system that had seen extensive combat employment. Brooks examined the rifle more closely, noting modifications that weren't immediately obvious but suggested extensive customization. The trigger had been professionally adjusted to provide a crisp, consistent break. The stock had been fitted with adjustable components that allowed Elena to achieve perfect shooting position regardless of terrain conditions. Even the barrel showed evidence of careful maintenance, with a bore that reflected light like a mirror despite obvious signs of heavy use. "How many confirmed kills?" Brooks asked quietly, using the professional terminology that acknowledged Elena's transition from training participant to recognized sniper. Elena paused in her equipment check, considering how much of her combat history to reveal. Officially, 43 confirmed kills across 3 deployments. Unofficially, the number is higher, but some situations didn't allow for proper documentation. The numbers hit Brooks like a physical blow. 43 confirmed kills represented more combat experience than most soldiers accumulated during entire careers. It meant Elena had been trusted with missions that required the elimination of high-value targets, placed in situations where a single shot could determine the outcome of major operations, and proven herself under the kind of extreme pressure that revealed a person's true character. Elena completed her equipment preparation and slung the rifle across her back, securing it for movement to her chosen firing position. "Sir, I need to brief whoever's going to be observing my actions. They'll need to understand what they're seeing if they're going to provide accurate reports about my performance." Brooks looked around the staging area, realizing that none of the available personnel had sufficient experience to properly evaluate a professional sniper's actions. "Vasquez, I'm beginning to understand that we might not have anyone qualified to observe your work." The admission revealed the extent to which Elena's capabilities exceeded the experience base of her current unit. Fort Davidson's advanced marksmanship program was designed to train competent soldiers to shoot accurately at moderate ranges, not to produce the kind of precision marksmen who could engage targets at extreme distances under combat conditions. Elena's presence represented a level of expertise that simply didn't exist elsewhere in the unit. Elena began moving toward the water tower that would serve as her firing position, her pace measured and deliberate. As she walked, her mind automatically processed the tactical environment, cataloging wind conditions, identifying potential interference factors, and calculating the ballistic requirements for shots at various distances and angles. This kind of environmental assessment had become second nature during her years as an operational sniper, a continuous background process that kept her prepared for immediate employment. Captain Rodriguez intercepted her movement, accompanied by a civilian law enforcement officer who introduced himself as Detective Miller from the regional tactical team. Miller had been designated as Elena's observer, though his obvious unfamiliarity with military sniper operations suggested that his oversight would be more administrative than technical. "Staff Sergeant, before you take position, I need to understand your assessment of the tactical situation," Rodriguez said. "What are you seeing that we might have missed?" Elena stopped and looked toward the school building, her trained eyes picking out details that others had overlooked. The shooter's initial position was near the administrative offices, but he's likely moved by now. The pattern of shots suggests he's conducting a systematic sweep of the building, rather than defending a fixed position. If he has military training, he'll be using movement to prevent law enforcement from fixing his location. She pointed toward specific windows in the school building, each gesture indicating potential firing positions or observation points. Those classroom windows provide excellent fields of fire toward any approach route. If he's thinking tactically, he'll use them to engage any entry team before they can reach the building's interior. Detective Miller was taking notes, though Elena could see that much of her analysis was beyond his experience base. "What do you need from us to provide effective support?" Elena considered the question carefully, drawing upon her experience in similar situations during combat deployments. "I need real-time communication with any entry teams so I can provide immediate updates on target movement. I also need authorization to take precision shots if the tactical situation requires it, with the understanding that I'll be making life-or-death decisions based on information that may not be available to ground-level commanders." The request represented a significant leap of faith for Rodriguez and his team. They were essentially asking Elena to serve as their primary intelligence asset and potential executioner, roles that required absolute trust in her judgment and capabilities. Without extensive knowledge of her background and training, they were taking her qualifications on faith during a crisis where mistakes could result in the deaths of innocent children. Elena began climbing the water tower, her movement confident despite the height and potential exposure to hostile fire. The elevated position provided an unobstructed view of the school building and surrounding area, allowing her to observe details that were invisible from ground level. As she established her firing position, Elena's training took over completely, transforming her from an ordinary soldier into a precision weapon system optimized for long-range engagement. Her shooting position was textbook perfect, a stable platform that would allow her to deliver accurate fire at any target within her effective range. Elena adjusted her scope for the 680-meter distance to the school building, accounting for the slight crosswind and temperature conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded engagement, each inhalation and exhalation timed to provide optimal shooting stability. Through her scope, Elena could see details of the school building that were invisible to observers at ground level. Movement in several classrooms indicated that children and teachers were still alive and following lockdown procedures, huddled against walls and away from windows. More critically, she could identify potential firing positions where the shooter might establish himself to engage responding officers. "Overwatch in position," Elena reported through her radio, using the professional terminology that identified her role in the tactical operation. "I have complete observation of the target building and am prepared to provide precision fire support on command." The response from the command post was immediate and grateful. "Copy, Overwatch. What's your assessment of current conditions?" Elena conducted a systematic scan of the building, her scope revealing details that painted a clearer picture of the tactical situation. "I observe movement in Classroom 7, appears to be students and staff in defensive positions. Similar activity in Classrooms 3, 5, and 11. The hallway near the administrative offices shows evidence of recent gunfire, but I don't see any visible casualties from this angle." She continued her observation, noting factors that would be critical for any entry team attempting to breach the building. The main entrance is partially obstructed by an overturned desk. likely placed there by the shooter to channel any responding officers into a predetermined kill zone. The side entrances appear clear, but they provide limited concealment for approaching personnel. Detective Miller, positioned on the ground near the base of the water tower, was relaying Elena's observations to the tactical team commanders. His radio traffic indicated growing confidence in the information she was providing, as her reports proved more detailed and tactically relevant than anything they'd received from other sources. Elena's scope suddenly picked up movement that made her blood run cold. A figure in dark clothing was moving systematically through the main hallway, carrying what appeared to be a military-style rifle and additional equipment that suggested extensive preparation for this attack. The individual's movement pattern was disciplined and tactical, indicating combat training that would make him significantly more dangerous than a typical active shooter. "I have eyes on the target," Elena reported, her voice maintaining professional calm despite the implications of what she was observing. Adult male, dark clothing, carrying an assault rifle and what appears to be additional ammunition. He's moving east through the main hallway toward the classroom wing. The target disappeared from view as he entered a section of the building that wasn't visible from Elena's position, but his direction of movement suggested he was systematically working his way toward areas where the largest numbers of children would be concentrated. Elena adjusted her position slightly, trying to acquire a better angle that would allow her to maintain observation of his probable route. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with increased urgency. "Overwatch, can you get a clear shot if the opportunity presents itself?" Elena studied the building's layout, calculating angles and distances for potential engagement scenarios. "Affirmative. If the target presents himself at any of the windows facing this direction, I can deliver precision fire at ranges from 600 to 750 meters. The commitment carried enormous weight. Elena was volunteering to take responsibility for a shot that could save dozens of children's lives, or, if she missed, potentially make the situation worse by alerting the shooter to external threats. Her confidence in making such a promise was based on thousands of hours of training and years of combat experience, but the stakes involved transformed this from a military operation into something far more personal. Through her scope, Elena continued to monitor the building while conducting mental rehearsals of potential engagement scenarios. Wind conditions were stable, visibility excellent, and her equipment was performing optimally. If the opportunity arose, she would be ready to deliver the kind of precision shot that had made her reputation during her years as a Marine Scout sniper. The radio crackled with updates from ground-level observers, but Elena filtered out everything except information directly relevant to her mission. Her world had narrowed to the view through her scope, the feel of her rifle, and the systematic observation that would allow her to protect the innocent lives trapped inside the building below. Elena's scope swept across the school building in a methodical pattern that covered every window and doorway visible from her elevated position. Through the magnified optics, she could observe details that were invisible to ground-level personnel. But what she was seeing painted a picture far more complex and dangerous than anyone had initially understood. The movement patterns she detected weren't consistent with a single active shooter operating alone, and the tactical sophistication of the preparations suggested planning that extended far beyond a spontaneous act of violence. In Classroom 4, Elena observed a teacher attempting to barricade the door with desks while approximately 15 children huddled in the corner farthest from the windows. The teacher's movements were frantic but organized, following active shooter protocols that had become standard in American schools. What concerned Elena was the methodical way someone was testing the door from the hallway side, applying pressure in different locations as if probing for structural weaknesses rather than simply trying to force entry. "Command, this is Overwatch," Elena reported through her radio, keeping her voice low and controlled. "The target appears to be conducting systematic reconnaissance of locked classrooms rather than attempting immediate breach. This suggests advanced tactical training and potentially extended timeline for the incident." Captain Rodriguez's response carried new tension. "Overwatch, we're receiving reports from inside the building that suggest the possibility of multiple suspects. Can you confirm or deny additional targets?" Elena adjusted her scope's magnification and began a more detailed sweep of the building's interior spaces. The question of multiple shooters transformed the tactical situation completely, changing it from a containment and elimination problem to a complex counter-assault that would require significantly more resources and coordination. Through her enhanced optics, she could detect movement in areas of the building that had previously appeared clear, shadows and motion that could indicate additional threats or could simply be the result of panicked civilians moving between hiding places. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission from Detective Miller, who was monitoring law enforcement communications from his position at the base of the water tower. Overwatch. We're getting scattered reports from teachers inside the building. Some are reporting gunfire from the eastern wing, others are hearing movement in the western corridors. The pattern doesn't match a single individual. Elena's training had included extensive instruction on multi-target environments, scenarios where snipers had to prioritize threats while maintaining awareness of multiple hostile actors. The complexity exponentially increased when civilian lives were at stake, as each decision about target priority could result in innocent casualties if she focused on the wrong threat at the critical moment. Through her scope, Elena detected movement in the administrative wing that confirmed her worst fears. A second figure in tactical clothing was moving through the offices near the main entrance, carrying equipment that appeared to include explosive devices. The individual's movement pattern was coordinated with the first shooter, suggesting they were communicating and executing a predetermined plan rather than operating independently. Command, I have visual confirmation of a second suspect in the administrative wing. Adult male. Tactical clothing, carrying what appears to be an assault rifle and additional equipment that could include explosives. The two targets appear to be coordinating their movements. The revelation sent ripples of alarm through the command post communications. Elena could hear background conversations as incident commanders revised their tactical plans to account for multiple threats operating in coordination. The presence of potential explosives added another layer of complexity, as any premature engagement could trigger detonations that would cause mass casualties among the trapped civilians. Elena's position on the water tower, which had initially provided excellent observation and fire support capabilities, was beginning to feel exposed and vulnerable. If the shooters had conducted advanced reconnaissance of the area, they would have identified her location as the optimal sniper position for anyone attempting to provide overwatch. The possibility that she was operating in an environment where the opposition had anticipated and planned for her presence made every moment on the tower increasingly dangerous. Her radio received an encrypted transmission from Major Patterson, who had apparently gained access to classified intelligence sources during the crisis. Overwatch, we're receiving information that suggests this incident may be connected to a domestic terrorism cell that has been under federal surveillance. The suspects may have military or law enforcement training and could be equipped with advanced communications and surveillance equipment. The intelligence update transformed Elena's understanding of the threat she was facing. Instead of responding to a spontaneous act of violence by a disturbed individual, she was now engaged in a counter-terrorism operation against trained operatives who had selected the elementary school as a high-value target designed to maximize psychological impact and media attention. The shooters weren't just trying to kill children, they were attempting to create a national tragedy that would serve their political or ideological objectives. Elena's scope detected a third area of concern that made her stomach clench with professional dread. Movement in the school's cafeteria suggested that someone was positioning equipment near the kitchen area, where natural gas lines and electrical systems could be weaponized to create a devastating explosion. If the terrorists had planned a multi-stage attack that culminated in destroying the entire building, conventional tactical responses would be inadequate to prevent mass casualties. Command, I'm observing suspicious activity in the cafeteria area, possible placement of explosive devices near utility systems. If the suspects are planning to destroy the building, we may have a very limited window for successful intervention. Captain Rodriguez's response revealed the strain of commanding an operation that was expanding beyond his department's capabilities. Overwatch. Federal assets are en route, but their estimated arrival time is still 25 minutes. We need to know if you can provide immediate tactical solutions with the resources currently available. Elena understood that Rodriguez was asking if she could single-handedly neutralize multiple armed terrorists before they could execute whatever final phase of their plan involved destroying the school with hundreds of children inside. The question forced her to confront the limitations of even the most skilled sniper operating alone against multiple coordinated threats. Through her scope, Elena could see that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Teachers in several classrooms were attempting to evacuate their students through windows, creating exposed targets that the terrorists could engage from multiple positions inside the building. The systematic nature of the attack suggested that the perpetrators had anticipated this response and were prepared to conduct precision shooting against fleeing civilians. Elena's radio received an urgent transmission from Sergeant Major Brooks, whose voice carried a tone she'd never heard before. "Vasquez, I need you to understand something. 3 months ago, when you walked into my program, I thought you were just another soldier looking for an easy assignment. Now I'm asking you to do something that goes beyond any training or preparation. Those kids in there, some of them are my neighbor's children. My own granddaughter attends that school." The personal revelation added emotional weight to an already overwhelming tactical situation. Elena realized that her deception during the past 3 months hadn't just affected her own military career. It had prevented her from building the kind of professional relationships that might have made this operation more effective. Brooks and other personnel who could have provided crucial support were operating based on incomplete information about her capabilities and limitations. Elena's scope suddenly acquired a clear view of the first shooter as he moved past a window in classroom 8. Through her magnified optics, she could see details of his equipment and positioning that revealed the sophistication of his preparation. The individual was wearing body armor capable of stopping rifle rounds, carried multiple magazines and communication equipment, and moved with the kind of tactical precision that indicated extensive military training. "I have a potential shot opportunity on target 1, Elena reported, settling into her shooting position with movements that had become automatic through years of training. Range 720 meters. Slight crosswind from the southeast. Target is wearing body armor but presenting a partial headshot." The decision point had arrived with stark clarity. Elena could attempt to engage the first terrorist, but doing so would reveal her position to the other threats and potentially trigger their final phase before law enforcement could respond. Alternatively, she could maintain observation and wait for additional assets to arrive, during which time the terrorists might complete their preparations and begin systematic execution of hostages. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with the weight of command authority. "Overwatch, you are authorized to engage at your discretion, but understand that once you fire, you become their primary target." Elena controlled her breathing and settled her crosshairs on the narrow portion of the terrorist's head that was visible above his body armor. At 720 meters, with current wind conditions and the stress of the tactical situation, the shot represented the outer limits of precision marksmanship. A miss would not only fail to neutralize the threat, but would also alert all the terrorists to her presence and capabilities. Her finger found the trigger's reset point, the mechanical position where the slightest additional pressure would discharge the rifle. Elena had made similar shots dozens of times during combat deployments, but never with so many innocent lives hanging in the balance. The weight of responsibility was enormous, amplified by the knowledge that her decision would determine whether hundreds of children lived or died. Through her scope, Elena could see movement in other parts of the building that suggested the terrorists were beginning their final phase. Equipment was being positioned, communications were being conducted, and the systematic nature of their preparations indicated they were operating on a predetermined timeline that would culminate in mass casualties regardless of law enforcement response. Elena's radio crackled with updates from ground-level observers who were reporting increased activity inside the school. Windows were being broken in several classrooms, possibly to create firing positions or to vent explosive gases before detonation. The sound of gunfire had increased, suggesting that the terrorists were no longer concerned about maintaining operational security. "Overwatch, we're out of time," Rodriguez transmitted with obvious desperation. "Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen now." Elena made her final sight adjustments, accounting for every environmental factor that could affect bullet trajectory. Her world narrowed to the precise relationship between her crosshairs and the target, everything else fading into background awareness. This was the moment that 15 years of training and 3 combat deployments had prepared her for, the ultimate test of her skills as a precision marksman. The shot, when it came, surprised Elena despite her years of experience. The rifle's recoil was familiar and controlled, but the psychological impact of engaging a terrorist threat while hundreds of children's lives hung in the balance created an entirely different kind of pressure than she'd experienced during military deployments. Elena's bullet struck the terrorist's head with a precision that had made her legendary among Marine Scout snipers, the impact visible through her scope as a pink mist that confirmed an instant kill. The body dropped immediately, weapon clattering across the classroom floor as nervous system functions ceased in milliseconds. But Elena's satisfaction at the successful engagement lasted only seconds before she realized that her shot had triggered exactly the response she'd feared most. The remaining terrorists immediately shifted into what appeared to be an accelerated timeline, their movements becoming more urgent and systematic as they abandoned whatever patient plan they'd been executing in favor of immediate action. Through her scope, Elena could see the second terrorist speaking rapidly into a communication device, while moving toward what appeared to be prepared positions near the cafeteria. The coordination of their response confirmed that these weren't amateur actors but trained operatives who had planned for the possibility of sniper interference. "Target 1 neutralized," Elena reported through her radio, already adjusting her position to acquire the next threat. "Remaining suspects are accelerating their timeline. I assess we have less than 5 minutes before they initiate their final phase." Captain Rodriguez's response carried a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. "Outstanding work, Overwatch. Can you engage the remaining targets before they complete their preparations?" Elena was already tracking the second terrorist through her scope, but his movement pattern had become more tactical and unpredictable since her first shot. Instead of presenting himself at windows or in open areas, he was using interior walls and doorways for concealment, while advancing toward positions that would give him advantages in any subsequent engagement. The improvement in his tactical discipline suggested that Elena's demonstration of precision shooting capability had fundamentally altered his assessment of the threat she represented. Her radio crackled with an incoming transmission that she hadn't expected. "Elena, this is Marcus." Her brother's voice cut through the tactical communications with startling clarity. "I'm inbound with a federal tactical team. ETA 8 minutes to your position." The revelation that Marcus was en route with federal support provided Elena with the first genuinely hopeful news she'd received since the crisis began. Her brother's special operations background and experience with counterterrorism operations meant that he would understand both her capabilities and the tactical complexity of the situation she was facing. More importantly, his arrival would provide her with backup that was trained to coordinate with precision marksmen in high-stakes environments. "Marcus, how did you—" Elena began, then realized that questions about his presence could wait until after they'd resolved the immediate crisis. "Never mind. I have multiple targets still active inside the building, with evidence suggesting explosive devices positioned for maximum structural damage." "Copy that. I'm coordinating with the on-scene commander for immediate tactical support. What do you need from us?" Elena's mind automatically shifted into the kind of tactical planning that had characterized her most successful operations during military deployments. The arrival of qualified support personnel meant she could transition from operating as a lone sniper to functioning as part of a coordinated team, dramatically improving their chances of preventing the catastrophic conclusion that the terrorists appeared to be planning. "I need close assault elements who can breach from multiple directions simultaneously while I provide overwatch and precision fire support," Elena replied. "The remaining suspects have positioned themselves to defend against conventional single-point entry, but they can't cover all approaches if we coordinate properly." While she waited for Marcus and his team to arrive, Elena continued her observation of the school building, noting changes in the terrorists' positions and preparations that would be critical intelligence for any assault operation. Through her scope, she could see that they were no longer attempting to maintain concealment, instead focusing on finalizing whatever devices they'd positioned throughout the building. Her radio received a transmission from Detective Miller, whose position at the base of the water tower had given him a different perspective on the developing situation. "Overwatch, I'm observing local law enforcement officers taking positions around the building perimeter. Some of them appear to be preparing for immediate entry without waiting for federal support." Elena felt a surge of professional concern as she realized that well-intentioned but inadequately trained local officers might attempt a rescue operation that could trigger the very catastrophe they were trying to prevent. The terrorists had clearly planned for law enforcement response, and any premature breach attempt by officers without specialized training could result in mass casualties among both the children and the responding personnel. "Command, this is Overwatch," Elena transmitted with urgent authority. "I strongly recommend preventing any unauthorized entry attempts until properly trained tactical elements are in position. The suspects appear to have prepared for conventional law enforcement response, and premature action could trigger explosive devices." Captain Rodriguez acknowledged her recommendation, but Elena could hear background radio traffic indicating that local officers were struggling with the psychological pressure of knowing that children were in immediate danger while they waited for federal assets to arrive. The natural human response to such situations was immediate action, even when tactical considerations suggested that patience might save more lives. Elena's scope suddenly detected movement that made her realize the situation was deteriorating even faster than she'd feared. A third figure had appeared in the school's main hallway, this one smaller in stature and moving differently than the trained operatives she'd been observing. Through her magnified optics, Elena could see that this individual appeared to be a child, approximately 10 years old, who was being forcibly moved by one of the remaining terrorists. The sight of a hostage being positioned for maximum psychological impact transformed the tactical situation completely. Elena understood that she was no longer dealing with terrorists who were planning to destroy the building and everyone inside it. She was facing operatives who intended to use innocent children as human shields while conducting a negotiated standoff that would maximize media attention and political impact. Command, I have visual confirmation of a hostage situation. Adult suspect is using what appears to be a young child as a human shield while positioning near the main entrance. This significantly complicates any tactical response. Elena's radio immediately filled with crosstalk as various commanders and tactical personnel discussed the implications of the hostage situation. The presence of a visible child victim would prevent the use of many conventional tactical responses, including precision shooting that might endanger the innocent life being used as a shield. Through her scope, Elena could see the terrorist and child moving toward a position where they would be visible from multiple directions, clearly intended to maximize the psychological pressure on law enforcement personnel while providing the terrorist with protection from direct assault. The tactical sophistication of this maneuver confirmed that they were dealing with professionals who understood how to exploit both the technical limitations and emotional vulnerabilities of counterterrorism responses. Her radio crackled with Marcus's voice, much closer now and carrying the kind of controlled urgency that characterized special operations communications. Elena, I have eyes on your position. Federal tactical team is staging 200 meters south of your location. What's your current assessment? Elena provided a rapid but comprehensive briefing on the developing hostage situation, the positions of remaining terrorists, and her evaluation of the explosive devices that appeared to be positioned throughout the building. Marcus's responses indicated that he was processing the information with the kind of tactical analysis that would allow him to develop effective countermeasures. Elena, I need you to maintain overwatch while my team positions for coordinated assault. Can you guarantee precision fire support if we can create separation between the terrorists and the hostage? The question forced Elena to confront the ultimate test of her marksmanship abilities. Engaging targets who were using children as human shields required the kind of precision shooting that existed at the very edge of what was possible, even for the most skilled snipers. A miscalculation of inches could result in the death of an innocent child, while hesitation could allow terrorists to complete whatever devastating finale they had planned. Affirmative, Elena replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had sustained her through the most challenging shots of her military career. If you can create even momentary separation, I can deliver precise fire at any range within the building. Elena's position on the water tower suddenly felt more isolated and vulnerable, as she realized that the terrorists had likely identified her location and might be planning to neutralize her capabilities before federal tactical teams could complete their preparations. The elevated position that had provided excellent observation and fire support was also exposed to counter-sniper fire from anyone with adequate training and equipment. Her radio received an encrypted transmission from an unfamiliar voice that identified itself as Agent Harrison from the FBI's crisis response team. Overwatch, we're coordinating with your brother's tactical element for immediate assault operations. What do you need from us to maintain effectiveness? Elena's response reflected years of experience coordinating with various military and law enforcement agencies during complex operations. I need real-time communication with all assault elements and authorization to engage targets of opportunity without waiting for specific clearance. The tactical situation is changing too rapidly for traditional command and control procedures. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The request represented a significant departure from standard law enforcement protocols, which typically required specific authorization before snipers could engage targets. Elena was asking for the kind of operational autonomy that was normally reserved for military special operations in active combat zones, authority that reflected both the severity of the crisis and the trust that federal commanders were placing in her demonstrated capabilities. Agent Harrison's response came after a brief pause that suggested consultation with higher authorities. Overwatch, you are authorized to engage at your discretion in defense of civilian lives. Your brother's team will coordinate their movements with your fire support. Elena felt the familiar mental transition that occurred when she shifted from observation mode to active engagement preparation. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that provided optimal shooting stability. Her grip on the rifle adjusted to ensure consistent sight picture, and her mind began calculating the ballistic solutions for various potential target scenarios. Through her scope, she could see Marcus and his federal tactical team taking positions around the school building with the kind of systematic precision that characterized elite counterterrorism units. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful, each operator positioned to provide mutual support while maintaining optimal angles of approach for the building's multiple entrances. Elena's radio crackled with Marcus's voice providing final coordination instructions. Elena, we're initiating coordinated breach in 60 seconds. Maintain overwatch and engage any targets that threaten civilian lives or compromise the tactical operation. The countdown had begun for an operation that would either save hundreds of children's lives or result in a catastrophic failure that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their careers. Elena settled into her final shooting position, ready to provide the kind of precision fire support that had made her one of the most respected snipers in Marine Corps history. The synchronized countdown reached 0 at exactly 1,542 hours, and Marcus's tactical team initiated their coordinated breach with the kind of precision that Elena had only witnessed during the most elite military operations. Flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously at 3 different entry points, creating the disorientation and chaos that would provide crucial seconds of tactical advantage against the remaining terrorists. Elena's scope tracked the multiple points of entry, while her mind automatically calculated firing solutions for any targets that might present themselves during the confusion. Through her magnified optics, Elena could see the federal operators moving through the building with fluid efficiency, their movements coordinated by radio communications and months of training in similar scenarios. Each team member understood their specific role in the assault, but Elena realized that her elevated position provided her with the only comprehensive view of how the operation was developing across multiple areas of the building simultaneously. Overwatch has visual on Team Alpha's entry, Elena reported through her radio, watching as Marcus's primary assault element moved through the main entrance with systematic precision. No immediate contact, but I'm observing movement in the eastern corridor that suggests Target 2 is repositioning to engage your advance. Elena's warning proved accurate within seconds, as the terrorist she'd designated as Target 2 appeared at a classroom doorway with his weapon raised toward the advancing federal officers. From her position 680 meters away, Elena could see the tactical situation developing with crystal clarity, but the federal operators on the ground level were moving through a maze of corridors and doorways that limited their visibility and reaction time. The shot opportunity presented itself for less than 3 seconds, but Elena had been tracking the terrorist's movement pattern and was ready when he exposed himself. Her crosshairs settled on the center of his chest, the only target area visible above the classroom doorframe, and she squeezed the trigger with the controlled precision that had characterized thousands of similar engagements during her military career. Elena's bullet struck the terrorist's center mass, the impact spinning him away from the doorway and eliminating the immediate threat to Marcus's assault team. Through her scope, she could see the federal operators continuing their advance without breaking stride, their movements indicating that they understood she was providing Overwatch support and trusted her to neutralize threats before they became critical. Target 2 down, Elena reported, already shifting her scope to search for additional threats. Team Alpha, you have a clear corridor to the administrative wing, but maintain awareness of potential secondary devices in that area. Elena's radio crackled with Marcus's acknowledgement, but she was already focused on a new development that threatened to complicate their tactical success. The terrorist holding the child hostage had moved toward the cafeteria area where Elena had previously observed preparations for what appeared to be explosive devices. The positioning suggested that he was preparing to use the child's life as leverage for negotiations, or worse, planning to trigger destructive devices if the tactical operation continued. Command, Target 3 is moving toward the cafeteria with the hostage, Elena transmitted with controlled urgency. Based on previous observations, that area may contain explosive devices. Recommend extreme caution with any approaches from that direction. Agent Harrison's response came through her radio with the kind of tactical authority that indicated he was coordinating multiple elements of the federal response. Overwatch, can you maintain visual on the hostage situation while Team Alpha continues their advance? Elena adjusted her scope's field of view to encompass both the federal operators' continued movement through the building and the developing hostage crisis in the cafeteria area. The complexity of coordinating these multiple tactical elements, while maintaining her primary role as precision marksman, was testing every aspect of her training and experience, requiring her to process information and make decisions at a speed that few military personnel ever encountered. Through her magnified optics, Elena could see that the hostage-taker had positioned himself and the child in a location that maximized his tactical advantages while creating maximum psychological pressure on the responding officers. The child appeared to be a young girl, probably 8 or 9 years old, whose terrified expression was visible even at Elena's considerable distance from the building. Elena's professional training had included extensive instruction on hostage rescue scenarios, but those exercises had always involved adult subjects or training mannequins rather than actual children whose lives depended on split-second decisions made under extreme pressure. The psychological weight of potentially endangering an innocent child while attempting to save her was unlike anything Elena had experienced during her military deployments. Her radio received a transmission from Team Bravo, the federal tactical element that had breached through the school's eastern entrance and was advancing toward the cafeteria from a different direction. Overwatch, we have partial visual on the hostage situation. The suspect appears to be positioning near what looks like improvised explosive devices. Can you confirm the nature of those devices? Elena focused her scope on the equipment visible near the hostage-taker's position, drawing upon her experience with various types of explosive devices encountered during combat deployments. The materials appeared to include commercial fertilizer, fuel components, and electronic timing devices that suggested a sophisticated understanding of destructive chemistry rather than amateur bomb-making attempts. Team Bravo, I observe what appears to be ammonium nitrate-based devices with electronic timing mechanisms, Elena reported. The positioning and quantity suggest they're designed for maximum structural damage to this section of the building. Any premature detonation would likely cause catastrophic casualties among remaining civilians. The intelligence Elena provided transformed the tactical equation completely. Instead of simply rescuing a single hostage from an armed terrorist, the federal teams were now faced with preventing a catastrophic explosion that could kill hundreds of children, while simultaneously neutralizing a trained operative who understood how to exploit their tactical limitations. Elena's scope detected new movement that added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Additional figures were moving through sections of the building that had previously appeared clear, suggesting that the initial intelligence about the number of terrorists involved had been incomplete. These new contacts appeared to be wearing civilian clothing rather than tactical gear, making it difficult to determine whether they were additional threats or simply school personnel who had been hiding during the initial phases of the crisis. Command, I'm observing multiple additional contacts in civilian clothing throughout the building, Elena transmitted. Unable to determine their status from this distance, but their movement patterns don't match typical civilian behavior during an active shooter situation. Marcus's voice came through Elena's radio with the kind of controlled tension that indicated he was processing multiple sources of tactical information while continuing to lead his assault team through a complex and dangerous environment. Elena, maintain overwatch on the primary hostage situation while we investigate these additional contacts. If any of them present weapons or threaten civilian lives, you are cleared to engage. Elena understood that Marcus was giving her authority to make life-or-death decisions about individuals whose intentions weren't clearly established, trusting her judgment and experience to distinguish between genuine threats and innocent civilians who might be acting unpredictably due to fear and confusion. The responsibility was enormous, amplified by the knowledge that any mistakes could result in the deaths of innocent people or allow genuine terrorists to complete their destructive objectives. Her radio crackled with updates from various federal tactical elements as they continued their systematic advance through the building. Team Alpha had secured the administrative wing and was reporting evidence of additional explosive devices that appeared to be connected to a central timing mechanism. Team Bravo was approaching the cafeteria area but had encountered resistance from what appeared to be defensive positions that hadn't been visible during Elena's initial reconnaissance. Elena's scope suddenly acquired a clear view of one of the civilian-clothed individuals, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The person was carrying what appeared to be a detonation device and was moving purposefully toward the area where Team Alpha was conducting their search operations. The individual's movement pattern was tactical and deliberate, indicating training and hostile intent rather than the panicked behavior of an innocent civilian. Team Alpha, you have a potential hostile approaching your position from the south corridor, Elena warned, settling her crosshairs on the individual while waiting for clearer confirmation of threat status. Civilian clothing, carrying what appears to be electronic equipment movement pattern suggests hostile intent. Elena's warning proved prescient as the individual suddenly produced a concealed weapon and began moving toward Team Alpha's position with obvious aggressive intent. The tactical situation had crystallized into a clear threat that required immediate neutralization to prevent potential casualties among the federal operators who were focused on their explosive device search. Elena's shot was fired without conscious decision, her training and experience automatically triggering the engagement sequence when the tactical situation demanded immediate action. The bullet struck the armed individual's center mass, neutralizing the threat before he could engage the federal tactical team or trigger whatever device he'd been carrying. Additional hostile down, Elena reported, already scanning for other potential threats while monitoring the continued advance of federal tactical elements throughout the building. Team Alpha should be aware that there may be other individuals in civilian clothing who pose hostile threats. The complexity of the tactical situation was testing the limits of Elena's ability to provide comprehensive overwatch while maintaining awareness of multiple developing scenarios. Hisso, her position on the water tower provided excellent observation capabilities, but the mental demands of processing information from multiple sources while making split-second decisions about target engagement was exhausting, even her considerable experience and training. Elena's radio received a transmission from Agent Harrison that indicated the federal coordination was expanding beyond the immediate tactical operation. Overwatch. We're receiving intelligence that suggests this incident may be part of a coordinated attack involving multiple targets. Federal assets are being positioned to respond to potential secondary incidents, but your continued support is critical for resolving the current situation. The revelation that Elena might be participating in counterterrorism operations that extended beyond the elementary school added another dimension to an already complex situation. Instead of responding to an isolated incident, she was apparently providing support for operations against a network of terrorists who had planned multiple coordinated attacks designed to maximize psychological impact and media attention. Elena's scope detected movement in the cafeteria area that suggested the hostage situation was reaching a critical phase. The terrorist holding the child appeared to be making final preparations with the explosive devices, his movements becoming more urgent and systematic as federal tactical teams continued their advance through other parts of the building. Team Bravo, the hostage-taker is accelerating his timeline, Elena reported with controlled urgency. I assess you have less than 2 minutes before he either initiates negotiations or triggers his devices. Elena settled into her final shooting position, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether hundreds of children lived or died. Her crosshairs found the narrow target area visible around the child being used as a human shield, a precision shot that represented the ultimate test of her abilities as a professional marksman. The tactical situation was poised on the edge of either spectacular success or catastrophic failure, with Elena's skills as both sniper and tactical coordinator serving as the critical factor that would determine the outcome. Elena's crosshairs settled on a target area no larger than a quarter, the narrow space between the terrorist's head and the terrified child he held as a human shield. At 695 meters, with a slight crosswind and the psychological pressure of knowing that a missed shot would result in the immediate death of an innocent 8-year-old girl, this represented the most challenging precision shot Elena had ever attempted. Through her scope, she could see the child's wide, frightened eyes, and the terrorist's finger hovering near what appeared to be a detonation trigger for the explosive devices positioned throughout the cafeteria. Team Bravo had maneuvered to within 30 meters of the hostage situation, but their position provided no clear shot opportunity due to the terrorists' strategic use of the child as cover. Elena's elevated angle from the water tower was the only firing position that offered even the possibility of engaging the target without endangering the hostage, but the margin for error was measured in fractions of inches, rather than the typical precision tolerances that characterize normal sniper operations. "Overwatch, this is Team Bravo leader," came the transmission through Elena's radio. "We're in position, but we cannot attempt rescue without significant risk to the hostage. The suspect appears to be holding a dead man's switch connected to multiple explosive devices. Any disruption of his position could trigger catastrophic detonation." Elena studied the tactical situation through her scope, her mind automatically calculating the ballistic solution while assessing the numerous variables that could affect shot placement. Wind conditions had remained stable, but the stress of the extended operation had introduced physical factors that could impact her shooting precision. Her heart rate was elevated, her muscles carried tension from hours of maintaining shooting position, and the psychological pressure of the situation was unlike anything she'd experienced during military deployments. "Team Bravo, I have a potential shot opportunity, but it requires perfect conditions and precise timing," Elena transmitted, her voice carrying the controlled calm that had characterized her communications throughout the crisis. "The target area is approximately 2 inches wide, and any deviation could result in hostage casualties." Agent Harrison's voice came through the radio communications with the authority of someone making final command decisions. "Overwatch, you are authorized to take the shot if you assess reasonable probability of success. The alternative is likely catastrophic casualties among remaining civilians in the building." Elena controlled her breathing and settled into the shooting position that had become second nature through thousands of hours of training and years of combat experience. Her rifle was perfectly zeroed, her scope adjustments were precise, and her ammunition was match-grade cartridges that she'd personally selected for consistency. Every technical aspect of the shot was optimized, but the human factors, her own stress levels, fatigue, and the enormous psychological pressure, represented variables that no amount of training could completely eliminate. Through her scope, Elena could see that the terrorist was becoming increasingly agitated as federal tactical teams continued their systematic advance through other areas of the building. His movements were more erratic, and his grip on both the child and the detonation device appeared to be tightening. Elena realized that if she was going to take the shot, it had to be within the next few seconds before the tactical situation deteriorated further. Elena's finger found the trigger's reset point, that precise mechanical position where the slightest additional pressure would discharge the rifle. Her crosshairs were aligned perfectly with the narrow target area, her breathing was controlled and stable, and her muscle memory had taken over the technical aspects of precision shooting. The world had narrowed to the exact relationship between her scope's reticle and the target that represented the difference between saving an innocent life and witnessing a catastrophic failure. The shot, when it came, was fired with the kind of unconscious precision that represented the culmination of Elena's 15-year evolution from novice shooter to professional sniper. The bullet traveled 695 meters in just over half a second, maintaining perfect trajectory despite the crosswind conditions, and arriving exactly where Elena had intended. The terrorist's head snapped back with the impact, his body dropping instantly as nervous system functions ceased, while the detonation device fell harmlessly to the floor without triggering. Team Bravo moved immediately to secure the child and neutralize the explosive devices, their actions coordinated and efficient as they completed the rescue operation that Elena's precision shot had made possible. Through her scope, Elena could see the little girl being carried to safety by federal tactical officers, her terrified crying audible through the radio communications as a sound of life rather than death. "Overwatch, outstanding shot!" Marcus's voice came through the radio with obvious relief and professional admiration. "Hostage secure. All explosive devices being rendered safe by EOD personnel. The building is clear of hostile threats." Elena maintained her position for several more minutes, while federal tactical teams conducted their systematic search for any remaining threats or explosive devices. Her role as Overwatch required her to provide continued observation until the tactical operation was completely concluded, but she could feel the adrenaline beginning to subside as the immediate crisis passed. The school building below her was now swarming with law enforcement personnel, emergency medical technicians, and federal agents who were conducting the complex post-incident procedures required after a counterterrorism operation. Elena could see children being evacuated through windows and doorways, their faces showing the kind of traumatic stress that would require months of counseling and support to overcome. Elena's radio crackled with Agent Harrison's voice, now carrying a tone of professional respect that hadn't been present during their earlier communications. Overwatch. Federal Command is requesting immediate debrief on your tactical performance during this operation. Your precision shooting and tactical coordination were instrumental in preventing what could have been the worst domestic terrorism incident in recent history. As Elena began the careful process of securing her equipment and preparing to descend from the water tower, she reflected on how dramatically the past 6 hours had transformed her situation at Fort Davidson. The soldier who had arrived at the staging area that morning as an overlooked participant in an advanced marksmanship program was now being recognized as a precision marksman whose skills had saved hundreds of lives. Sergeant Major Brooks was waiting for Elena when she reached ground level, his expression showing a mixture of amazement, respect, and what appeared to be professional embarrassment. The man who had dismissed her abilities for 3 months was now confronted with undeniable evidence that he had completely misjudged one of the most capable soldiers ever assigned to his program. "Yeah, Luz, Vasquez," Brooks said as Elena approached with her rifle case. "I owe you an apology that's about 15 years overdue. I've been in the military for 32 years, and I've never witnessed shooting like what you demonstrated today." Elena nodded acknowledgement of Brooks's words, but her attention was focused on the school building where emergency personnel were still conducting their evacuation and security operations. "Sir, I was just doing my job. Those children deserve to go home to their families tonight." Captain Rodriguez joined the conversation, accompanied by several federal agents who were obviously preparing to conduct extensive debriefings about the tactical operation. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I need you to understand that what happened here today goes far beyond normal military duties. You provided tactical support that prevented a national tragedy." Elena was beginning to realize that her actions during the crisis would have consequences that extended well beyond her current assignment at Fort Davidson. The federal agents were clearly interested in her capabilities and background, while her military superiors were reassessing everything they thought they knew about her qualifications and potential assignments. Agent Harrison approached with a tablet containing preliminary after-action reports that documented Elena's performance during the operation. "Staff Sergeant, our initial analysis indicates that you fired a total of 4 precision shots during the operation, with 4 confirmed eliminations of hostile targets. The final shot, at nearly 700 meters under stress conditions, has been reviewed by federal sniper instructors who describe it as one of the most difficult precision shots ever successfully completed." The documentation was building an official record of Elena's performance that would become part of her permanent military file, forever changing how she was perceived within the military community. The days of being dismissed as lucky or having her abilities attributed to favorable conditions were permanently ended. Elena's radio received a final transmission from Marcus, whose federal tactical team was completing their post-operation procedures inside the school building. "Elena, I need you to know how proud I am of what you accomplished today. Dad's going to want to hear every detail when we call him tonight." The mention of their father reminded Elena that her actions would become known to her family and former military colleagues, transforming her from someone who had been seeking anonymity into a recognized expert whose capabilities would be in demand throughout the military and law enforcement communities. Detective Miller, who had served as Elena's observer throughout the operation, was shaking his head in amazement as he reviewed his notes from the tactical operation. "Ma'am, in 23 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything like your performance today. You were conducting tactical coordination and precision shooting simultaneously while processing information from multiple sources. It was like watching someone operate at a completely different level." Elena accepted the praise graciously, but she was already thinking about the implications of her revealed capabilities for her future military service. The anonymous assignment she had sought at Fort Davidson was no longer possible, as her demonstrated expertise would inevitably lead to assignments that matched her actual qualifications rather than her stated preferences. Lieutenant Colonel Chen appeared with official paperwork that would document Elena's actions for military records and potential commendation procedures. "Staff Sergeant, I need to inform you that your performance today will be reviewed for several significant military decorations. Additionally, there have already been informal inquiries from Special Operations Commands about your availability for advanced assignments. Elena realized that her decision to reveal her true capabilities had transformed not just how others perceived her but had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her military career. The quiet assignment she had sought as a way to process her grief over Miguel's death was ending, replaced by recognition and opportunities that reflected her actual abilities and experience. As the sun set over Fort Davidson, Elena found herself surrounded by military and law enforcement personnel who were treating her with the kind of professional respect that she had deliberately avoided for the past 3 months. The woman they had called Lucky was now being recognized as one of the most capable precision marksmen they had ever encountered. Elena looked back at the elementary school one final time, where emergency lights illuminated the building that had nearly become the site of unimaginable tragedy. 347 children had gone home to their families that night because Elena had been willing to abandon her anonymity and demonstrate the skills that 15 years of training and combat experience had given her. The transformation was complete. Elena Vasquez was no longer hiding from her reputation as an elite sniper. She was ready to embrace whatever new challenges her demonstrated capabilities would bring. The shot that silenced an entire military training facility came from a woman they'd been calling Lucky for 3 months. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez had just hit her 47th consecutive target at distances ranging from 800 to 1,200 meters, each bullet finding its mark with surgical precision while a crowd of skeptical male soldiers watched in stunned disbelief. What they didn't know was that Elena had been holding back, and today, she was done pretending her skills were anything less than extraordinary. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Davidson training grounds as Elena adjusted her shooting mat for the 4th time. The Oklahoma wind carried the scent of prairie grass and gun oil, familiar smells that should have been comforting. Instead, they reminded her of every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh, every time someone attributed her marksmanship to pure chance rather than the 15 years of military experience that had made her one of the deadliest snipers in Army history. "Vasquez, you're up for the quarterly assessment," barked Sergeant Major Brooks, his weathered face showing the same expression of barely concealed irritation he'd worn every time he addressed her for the past 3 months. At 62, Brooks represented the old guard of military thinking, the kind of career soldier who believed that exceptional marksmanship was a man's domain, and that women who excelled were either anomalies or beneficiaries of lowered standards. Elena nodded without speaking, her dark eyes focused on the rifle range that stretched out before her like a geometric puzzle of targets, wind flags, and distance markers. She'd learned long ago that arguing with men like Brooks was pointless. Better to let her shooting speak for itself, even though it seemed that no amount of consistent accuracy could convince him that her skills were legitimate. The other soldiers gathered around the firing line with the casual interest of spectators at a sporting event. Most of them were part of the advanced marksmanship program, men who'd earned their positions through years of dedicated training and proven ability. Elena was the only woman in the group, a fact that seemed to define every interaction she had on this base. "Another lucky day for Vasquez," muttered Corporal Davidson, loud enough for everyone to hear. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of cocky confidence that came from being naturally gifted at something and assuming that made him an expert on everyone else's abilities. "Think she'll hit more than half her targets today." The comment drew chuckles from several other soldiers. Elena had heard variations of this joke dozens of times. No matter how consistently she performed, no matter how many targets she hit, or how small her groupings were, there was always someone ready to attribute her success to luck, favorable weather conditions, equipment advantages, or anything except her actual skill. $50 says she misses her first 3 shots, offered Specialist Martinez, a stocky man from Texas who'd been particularly vocal about his belief that Elena didn't belong in the advanced program. "Woman's been riding a streak of luck that's bound to run out eventually." Elena checked her rifle for the 100th time, running through the mental checklist that had become second nature during her years of active deployment. Bolt action smooth, scope properly mounted, barrel clean, ammunition consistent. Her weapon was a standard-issue M24 sniper weapon system, the same rifle she'd used during 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. It wasn't the most advanced sniper rifle available, but Elena knew its capabilities and limitations better than she knew her own heartbeat. What none of these men knew was that Elena Vasquez had been a Marine scout sniper before transferring to the Army, a fact she'd kept largely to herself since arriving at Fort Davidson. During her Marine service, she'd completed the most rigorous sniper training in the world, a program with a failure rate exceeding 80%. She'd graduated second in her class, the highest finish ever achieved by a woman in the program's history. Her transition to the Army had been motivated by personal reasons rather than professional ones. After her husband Miguel's death in a training accident, Elena had needed a change of scenery, a fresh start somewhere that didn't carry the weight of shared memories. The Army had been happy to accept a trained sniper, and Elena had been content to let her new colleagues form their own opinions about her abilities. Unfortunately, those opinions had been shaped more by prejudice than performance. Despite consistently outscoring most of the men in the advanced marksmanship program, despite hitting targets that others missed, despite demonstrating knowledge of ballistics and environmental factors that exceeded what was expected of someone at her rank, Elena found herself constantly defending her legitimacy. "Weather's looking good for shooting," observed Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, the base's advanced marksmanship coordinator. Chen was one of the few officers who seemed to evaluate Elena based on her performance rather than her gender, but even she appeared puzzled by the disconnect between Elena's abilities and her apparent lack of formal training credentials. The wind was indeed favorable, steady but predictable, the kind of consistent breeze that experienced shooters learn to read and compensate for rather than fight against. Temperature was moderate, humidity low, visibility excellent. Conditions were ideal for precision shooting, which meant that any misses would be attributed to shooter error rather than environmental factors. Elena settled into her shooting position, a prone stance that she'd refined through thousands of hours of practice. Her body formed a stable platform, her breathing controlled and rhythmic, her grip on the rifle firm but not tense. These fundamentals had been drilled into her until they became unconscious responses, muscle memory, that activated whenever she picked up a precision rifle. The first target was positioned at 600 meters, a standard distance for military marksmanship training. Elena adjusted her scope's elevation, calculating the bullet drop for that distance with her specific ammunition load. She'd been using the same lot of ammunition for weeks, having identified cartridges that performed consistently in her rifle. Competitive shooters understood the importance of ammunition consistency, but Elena suspected that most of her observers attributed this level of preparation to obsessive behavior rather than professional expertise. "Whenever you're ready, Vasquez," called Sergeant Major Brooks, his tone suggesting that he had better things to do than watch another lucky performance. Elena controlled her breathing, settling into the natural respiratory pause that provided the most stable shooting platform. Her crosshairs aligned perfectly with the center of the target, a black circle against a white background that represented the kill zone on a human silhouette. At this distance, hitting the target center was challenging but achievable for any competent marksman. Elena intended to do considerably better than merely hitting the target. The rifle's trigger broke cleanly, the shot surprising even Elena despite her years of experience. This was the mark of proper trigger control, the ability to fire the rifle without disturbing the sight picture, letting the weapon discharge at the optimal moment in the shooting sequence. The spotting scope operator, Corporal Johnson, called out the impact. "Dead center, X-ring, perfect score." Elena worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. The second target was positioned at 700 meters, requiring a different elevation setting and additional consideration for wind drift. She made the necessary adjustments quickly, her fingers finding the scope's turrets without conscious thought. The second shot followed the same deliberate process. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger squeeze. Follow through. The bullet struck the target with the same precision as the first, prompting another perfect score call from the spotter. "2 for 2, muttered Davidson, though his tone suggested surprise rather than admiration. "Maybe she's having another lucky morning." Elena ignored the commentary, focusing instead on the rhythm of precision shooting. Load, aim, fire, observe results, make adjustments, repeat. It was a meditative process that required complete mental focus and physical control. Each shot built upon the previous one, creating a chain of consistent performance that reflected hours of practice and years of experience. The third target was positioned at 800 meters, the distance where environmental factors began to play a more significant role in bullet placement. Wind speed and direction became critical considerations, as did temperature and humidity. Elena had been studying these conditions since arriving at the range, noting subtle changes in the wind flags and feeling for shifts in air pressure that might affect bullet flight. Her scope adjustments were more complex now, accounting for the increased bullet drop and the estimated wind drift at this extended range. Elena's calculations were performed quickly but carefully, drawing upon the ballistic knowledge she'd accumulated during her years as a professional sniper. The third shot struck the target with the same precision as the first two, earning another perfect score and causing a stir among the observers. 3 consecutive perfect shots at increasing distances was impressive by any standard, but Elena was just getting started. "Okay, that's definitely not luck," admitted Specialist Rodriguez, one of the newer members of the Advanced Marksmanship program. "Nobody gets that consistent by accident." "Don't be so sure," countered Martinez, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "Weather's perfect today. Give her some wind or mirage, and see how lucky she feels then." Elena continued her shooting sequence, moving to targets positioned at 900, 1,000, and 1,100 meters. Each shot required increasingly sophisticated calculations and more precise execution. At these distances, a minor error in judgment or technique would result in a complete miss, making consistent accuracy extremely difficult to achieve. Yet Elena continued to deliver perfect shots, each bullet finding the exact center of its intended target. Her breathing remained controlled, her shooting position unchanged, her trigger squeeze consistent. The observers grew quieter as the string of perfect hits continued, their casual dismissiveness giving way to genuine attention. 12 perfect shots," announced Corporal Johnson, his voice carrying a note of amazement. "I've never seen anything like this in 15 years of range operations." Sergeant Major Brooks moved closer to the spotting scope, apparently needing to verify the results for himself. His expression had shifted from bored irritation to focused interest, the change subtle but unmistakable. "Wind's picking up," he observed, noting the increased movement in the range flags. "Let's see how she handles some real conditions." Elena welcomed the challenge. Shooting in perfect conditions was satisfying, but adapting to changing environmental factors was what separated good marksmen from exceptional ones. She'd learned to read wind patterns during deployments where a missed shot could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The 13th target was positioned at 1,200 meters, the maximum effective range for her rifle system under ideal conditions. With the increased wind, this shot would test every aspect of her marksmanship skills. Elena studied the wind flags carefully, noting that the breeze was stronger and more variable than it had been for the previous shots. Her calculations took longer now, factoring in the estimated wind speed at various points along the bullet's flight path. Wind didn't affect a bullet uniformly. It had the greatest impact during the middle portion of the bullet's trajectory, when velocity had decreased, but the projectile was still far from its target. Elena made her scope adjustments and settled into her shooting position. The target appeared smaller at this distance, a tiny circle that represented a precision challenge beyond the capabilities of most shooters. She controlled her breathing, aligned her sights, and executed the shot with the same deliberate care she'd used for the previous 12. The bullet struck dead center, earning another perfect score and prompting spontaneous applause from several observers. 13 consecutive perfect shots was a performance that transcended luck or favorable conditions. It represented a level of marksmanship skill that few shooters ever achieved. "Holy shit," whispered Davidson, his earlier skepticism completely abandoned. "She's not missing anything." Elena continued shooting, working through additional targets as the wind conditions became increasingly challenging. Each shot required different calculations and adjustments, testing her ability to read environmental factors and make precise corrections. She adapted smoothly to each new challenge, her shots continuing to find their marks with mechanical precision. By the time she'd fired 25 consecutive perfect shots, word had spread throughout the base. Soldiers from other units began gathering at the range, drawn by reports of an unprecedented shooting performance. Elena could feel their attention, but she refused to let it distract her from the task at hand. The shooting continued for another hour, with Elena working through increasingly difficult target sequences. Moving targets, partially obscured targets, targets at extreme ranges that pushed her rifle system to its limits. Each new challenge was met with the same methodical approach and flawless execution. When she finally reached 47 consecutive perfect hits, the silence on the range was complete. Every observer understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a demonstration of marksmanship skill that would become legendary within the military community.